Ancient Gnostic schools of philosophy and spirituality produce some of the most profound, densely populated, and frankly bewildering cosmological systems of antiquity. The reader is confronted with a dizzying array of primal parents, various minds, lights, aeons, saviors, Sophias, treasuries of light, mists, syzygies, emanations, enneads, demiurges, archons, angels, demons, and much else besides. And to make these matters even more confusing, these systems seem to expand over time, with later texts like the Pisti Sophia positively bursting at the seams with reams and reams of entities. When they say a heavenly pleroma of fullness, they mean it. It's a fullness that completely scandalizes Occam's razor. But of all these cosmological narratives, one text stands out for its complete inaccessibility. Indeed, it's so strange it's only known as the Untitled Text of the Bruce Codex. Yeah, we understand so little of what's going on in it that it's proven basically impossible to even give it a title. So what can we actually say about this book, this text? One that seems to dwell intensely on the development and population of the primitive Pleroma itself, and is probably the most obscure and difficult in all of Gnostic literature. Let's explore the labyrinth of the Untitled Text of the Bruce Codex. Make sure to subscribe here to Esoterica for explorations of topics in esoteric history. And if you'd like to support this kind of work of providing evidence-backed, free, and accessible content like this, I'd hope you consider checking out my Patreon, where you can support the channel and make this kind of content possible, or even pick up some of the cool merch that we have available. And if you're new to the study of esotericism, I've made an entire study guide that will give you a reliable lay of the land and the literature associated with this field. And if you're interested in really going deep into actual historical books on topics in the occult and the mystical, check out our bookstore, Esoterica Rare Books. You can find all those links down below in the description and in the pinned comment. But now let's dive into what I have to admit is one of the most intimidating and perplexing Gnostic texts known. And that's saying something. The Untitled Text of the Bruce Codex. I'm Dr. Justin Sledge, and welcome to Esoterica, where we explore the arcane in history, philosophy, and religion. The British explorer James Bruce would purchase the codex that would ultimately come to bear his name in January of 1769 near Medinet Habu in Egypt, making it, along with the Askew Codex, among the earliest Gnostic manuscripts rediscovered in modern times. The Untitled Text is contained along with the Books of You, which I've covered in another episode and are absolutely interesting. Some of my most favorite Gnostic texts, and with some beautiful fragments of Gnostic hymns also that are really worth reading, but they're contained in this aptly named Bruce Codex, and this is dated to sometime in the mid-4th century of the Common Era, and the text is also probably based on a Greek original, perhaps of the late 3rd century. Sadly, the Codex is in a deplorable state of conservation, and was so from basically the time of its modern acquisition. It's composed of 78 papyrus leaves, or about 156 pages. The Untitled Treatise is some 31 of those leaves, of which 7 have just gone missing since it was recovered, along with the cover, which has also just disappeared. When it was eventually acquired by the British Library, the abuse continued for some reason. The codex at this point consisted of loose leaves, which were haphazardly bound together in 1886, literally with no attempt to order the pages, to separate versos from rectos, and not even to put them right side up. They're just pages bound in it upside down, and at that time each leaf was bound together between 2 sheets of tracing paper in an attempt at conservation. But now those sheets of tracing paper are now fused to the papyrus, rendering contemporary codicological study nearly impossible. Contemporary photos of the state of the Codex reveal that it's now worn to the point of being completely unreadable even under ultraviolet light, and is marred by mildew because humid England isn't the dry deserts of Egypt. Luckily, transcripts and early photographs of the text were made, and we can base modern edition on those and try to consult the text as well. But despite these travails, scholars have reconstructed what they generally take to be the original order of the pages of the Codex, though, again, as we'll see in this episode, not without some disagreement among the specialists. The language of the Untitled Treatise, like Pistis Sophia, is a relatively pure Sahidic Coptic, the classical language of the last form of Egyptian language, though not without some idiosyncrasies. In a somewhat elegant uncial hand, unlike the more cursive hand that is used for the Books of Yu. Indeed, the Books of Yu, the hymnic fragments, and the Untitled Treatise were all the work of different scribes, and originally probably weren't even codicological fellow travelers. We've lost some of the beginning and some of the end of the Untitled Treatise, and there are a few leaves that are just sort of stuck randomly in the Codex, many scholars thinking they should be at the beginning of the text, while now they are typically shown at the end of the book. And that's a clue to just how confusing this is all going to get. Scholars can't even agree if some pages belong at the beginning or at the end, or if they're even part of the book at all. What we can say with some degree of certainty, and that's saying a lot in this episode, is that the text is cosmological, specifically cosmogenic in character, and seems primarily to describe the emergence and population of the divine Pleroma, the realm prior to the generation of the physical cosmos as we know it. And to give you some sense of just how this text reads, I'm going to actually read you a typical, rather shortish chapter, here chapter 3 in its entirety. This is the Father, the second Demiurge. Through the breath of his mouth, the fourth thought inspired those without existence. They came into being through the will of this one, because it is he who commands the all. And so it comes into existence. He created the holy Pleroma in this way. 4 gates with 4 monads within the Pleroma, 1 monad at each gate and 6 helpers to each gate, making 24 helpers, and 24 myriad powers to each gate, and 9 enneads to each gate, and 10 decads to each gate, and 12 duodecads to each gate, and 5 pentads of powers to each gate, and an overseer who has 3 aspects: an unbegotten aspect, a true aspect, and an unutterable aspect to each gate. One of his aspects looks forth from the gate to the outer eons, the other looks inward to the Cepheus, and the other looks to the height, and the sonship is in each of the monads. And Aphrodon is there with his 12 benefict ones. The forefather is also there. Adam is there, who is of the light in his 365 eons. And the perfect mind is there, and they surround a rule which is in immortality. The unutterable aspect of the overseer looks toward the Holy of Holies, that is, the infinite one who is the head of the sanctuary. He has 2 aspects. One is open to the place of the deep, and the other is open to the place of the overseer, which is called the child. And there is a deep there, which is called the light, or the light giver, and an only begotten one is concealed within it, who manifests 3 powers, who is mighty in every power. This is the indivisible one. This is he who is never divided. This is he to whom the all has opened, for to him the powers belong. He has 3 aspects: an invisible aspect, and an all-powerful aspect, and an Aphrodon aspect, which is called Aphrodon Pexos. And there is an only begotten one concealed within him, namely the triple-powered one. When the thought comes forth from the deep, Aphrodon takes the thought and brings it to the only begotten one. The only begotten one brings it to the child, and they bring it forth to all the eons as far as the place of the triple-powered ones. And they are completed and taken to the 5 unbegotten ones. And it just goes on like that, over and over for dozens and dozens of pages. Just litanies upon litanies of the emergence of entity after entity, some of which are nested dozens, sometimes hundreds deep within one entity. Now, if it were just such a long list of entities, no matter how complicated, this would all be relatively easy to sort out with a good spreadsheet and a flowchart. Trust me, I've done that with a great many Gnostic texts, just plotting them out, how each one gives rise to the next in like a Excel spreadsheet. And even the Enochian systems I've done this with to make sense of all the heptarchic spirits associated with that system in John Dee and Edward Kelly. If it were just about spreadsheets, this would be a settled matter. But the text immediately and constantly bombards us with elements that are seemingly foreign to what we generally take to be true of every other Gnostic system that we know of. For instance, chapter 3 introduces us to a second Demiurge. A second Demiurge, who, by the way, is never described as either evil or even ignorant, so it's not really Sethian or Valentinian in some sense. In fact, both of these Demiurges, including another Demiurge we'll get to in a bit, a Mother Demiurge, are clearly divine and beneficent, more typical of Platonic or Hermetic Demiurges. So that's not a terribly typical aspect of any Gnostic cosmologies. But we do have a mention of the Sethius and the members of the Four Lights, Eleth, Davida, and Aureliel, the Triple Power Ones, which are all pretty typical Sethian Gnostic elements, just the same. And while the text will mention two distinct mother deities along with Sophia, and Sophia is just barely mentioned in the text really, we don't have the classic fall of Sophia narrative where she's generated at the very end of this cycle of emanation and makes a mistake and generates the Demiurge. Though, admittedly, we don't know how much longer the original text was, so maybe they got to it later on and we've just lost that section of the text. Yet, some Christ figure is said to be descending, actually kind of being built over time, as we'll see, and is embodied for some salvific role for which the text never completely details. Further, there are other entities, from Hermes the Thriceborn to Machias, Mikar, and Masonius, which are entities associated with baptism, are also mentioned. Even the Watchers, Gamaliel, Strimsukos, and Agramas, apparently of Enochic lore, make an appearance, but they're not evil fallen angels. Rather, they're actually helpers to those who believed in the light spark. We even mentioned in chapter 3, Perfect Mind showed up. That's interesting because we have another text, Thunder Perfect Mind, that mentions this entity. And this just happens over and over and over again in this text. Entities we know by name from other texts are doing completely, utterly unexpected roles. Lists of otherwise unknown entities or powers are punctuated with otherwise unknown attested beings. And all of this is compounded with dozens of nested aspects, powers, crowns, enneads, decads, and titles. It's just like this text is the result of you hitting the random button on a generate Gnostic cosmology game. But it gets worse, or better. I'm really not sure anymore today. The text doesn't seem to have one coherent, linear narrative at all. Chapters 6 and 10 seem to be describing the exact same metaphysical process, but with differing details. Chapter 21 contains material similar to chapters 1, 2, 7, and 17. And those sections might be their own parallel, separate text. Parallel, but not fully interacting with their current placement. Parallel and yet edited into the text as if they're distinct. Thus, we might not even be looking at a singular text in the Untitled Text at all, but a kind of quilt of similar texts, perhaps from a specific cosmogenic tradition which preserved rather than jettisoned the variations within that tradition. Think about, for instance, the book of Genesis, which preserves two distinct creation stories right next to each other without attempting really to reconcile the logically incoherent order of creation in both stories. It preserves two variations of the same story. What seems to have mattered is the apparent preservation of variation, an editorial feature which is actually pretty worthy of laud in my opinion, but, and this is a big but, and I cannot lie, that's a great editorial practice if you flag the reader that, one, you're doing that, and two, if there is a central narrative, just letting us know, doing us the solid of flagging where the variations begin and end. Otherwise, you end up with a patently confusing text and or a bunch of apologists trying to square textual circles because of their worship of the hermeneutical idol of biblical inerrancy. So, great. What we seem to have here are several textual variations quilted together without clear stitches, featuring a cosmogony in which various entities appear, many of which are mysterious to us, and others which we actually do know by name and by function other texts, but aren't functioning at all in the ways that we'd expect them to, given our understanding of the wider field of Gnostic literature. But the situation isn't totally hopeless, though after reading this text about a dozen times, I kind of wish it were hopeless, because then I could just give up. Dylan Burns has shown that there is some kind of literary dependence between the Untitled Text and Zostrianos, one of the so-called Platonizing Sethian text. Now, that's good news and bad news, as you could imagine, because Zostrianos is both the single longest text recovered from the Nag Hammadi library, and it's so badly damaged, especially in the middle of the text, that basically very little can be recovered, at least from that middle part of the section. I mean, when you read it in translation, the amount of bracket ... becomes the refrain of that text. But that said, it does appear that the Untitled Text is describing a similar kind of Pleroma as Zostrianos, but the Untitled Text works from the unknown primal parent ontologically down toward physical creation, and Zostrianos is a first-person ascent narrative from physical creation up to the Pleroma. And I'll let you guess which of the 15 pages of Zostrianos are so damaged as to be effectively unreadable. Yeah, it's the ones that overlap with most of the Pleroma as we would find it in the Untitled Treatise. Esoterica luck. Oh, did I also mention that Zostrianos seems to have been known to Plotinus and his student Porphyry? It doesn't really help at all in this problem, but it's a fun fact, some just random Neoplatonian Gnostic trivia there. A further link to the Sethian tradition in the Untitled Treatise is the prevalence of various autogenic characters. That is to say, entities which are titled as having caused themselves to come into being. They're just titled that way, but as Muhlberger points out, the Sethian text often designates some characters as autogenes or autogenesis, self-generated, although the text makes it really clear that they were in fact emanated from higher powers. So they're really all not autogenic. This autogenic title also appears in oracular literature, magical, divinatory kind of literature, specifically in praises of primal gods. And on those grounds, Muhlberger makes the very convincing argument that once those loose leaves that are now at the end of the McDermott edition, the one I just read from, those seem to hail the autogenic first Demiurge, and they should probably be placed at the start of the Untitled Text, not at the end, as the standard edition has it now. But again, that autogenic feature of some Sethian stuff links it to the kind of autogenic characters that we find in the Untitled Treatise. And I have to say that that reading, putting those sections that are now at the end back at the beginning, does make a lot of sense to me, especially given the generation of the Divine City, which we're not really sure what the Divine City, it may have been the primal form of the Pleroma, that we do see in Chapter 1 of the Untitled Text and in the loose pages now at the end. But going back to Zostrianos, Dylan isn't sure which direction the textual dependence between the two goes. We can see clear textual dependence between Zostrianos and the Untitled Text. They're similar, sometimes word for word, but they're definitely not the same cosmology, and we're not sure which direction the influence is going. For instance, the Barbello, a kind of divine mother, really isn't mentioned as such in Untitled, although we do get several divine mothers, at least two, so they do appear, though again, not as we would expect them. Another clue might just be from the strange double demiurges of the Untitled Text. Again, it's strange at first with double demiurges, but Muhlberger has shown that the fragments of the Neo-Pythagorean philosopher Numenius also posited the existence of a double demiurge. In his case, Numenius argued that one demiurge crafted the realm of being, that is to say the realm of the eternal forms and the mathematicals, and if those can be distinguished in Plato, but another demiurge, a lower demiurge, was responsible for impressing those forms onto matter. This is the classic Platonic demiurge as described in the Timaeus. And that kind of maps on to the Untitled Treatise. Chapter 1 does have a primal demiurge seemingly beyond all being in the classic Gnostic, Hermetic, Neoplatonic, Neo-Pythagorean vein, but a second demiurge does appear in Chapter 3, as I just read, as we've seen, which does generate the atom of light and the 365 eons associated with the atom of light. So it's strange for there to be two demiurges. I get it, it is unusual, but there is at least some potential philosophical and textual precedence for such an idea. But before that's all said and done, recall that the editor of the standard edition of the text, McDermott, seems to hold that chapter 3 is a variation of chapters 1 and 2, and thus should not be read as a continuation of the cosmogenic process at all. So thus the mention of the second Demiurge might just be a kind of attempt by a later editor to harmonize two variant traditions into one text. Well, which is it? Well, honestly, I have no idea. There's no scholarly consensus about this, and both positions seem perfectly reasonable to me. That's just how bonkers this text is. You can literally add an entire text to the beginning, read it again, and think, sure, why not? That seems to make as much sense as anything else about this text. Now, this would usually be part of the video where I would do my very best to lay out the consensus view of the flow and logic of the text. Well, there isn't any consensus. You want to know why? Because there's basically no secondary literature on this text to even start building a consensus. You want to know why? Look, hardly any scholars want to touch books like the Books of You or even the Pistis Sophia, texts universally agreed upon to be obscure in the extreme. But the Untitled Text is basically regarded as tattering off into the gaping maw of insane nonsense. Or as my friend and a true scholar in this field, M. David Litt, will put it to me, the text has, quote, a painfully high weirdness coefficient. And that's coming from a person absolutely steeped, one of the greatest scholars in the world in Gnostic lore. Also, you got to make sure to check out his content. I'll have a link below for checking out his channel. But as I've mentioned, these are the moments where I'm reading it and it makes me feel like I'm just about got some sense of what's going on, only to immediately lose the thread again. It honestly feels like the writer is pulling some kind of Voynich manuscript level Gnostic hustle on you. But because I guess there's nothing stopping me, and because clearly I'm a bit of an intellectual masochist, let's give it a whirl. We begin, like many Gnostic texts, with a primal first father set into a similarly primal deep. Emergent from this deep are the first place and the first sound, along with the productive logos or word, which is the first demiurge. That primal crafter generates the basic structures of the divine fullness or Pleroma, the one, the Ennead, and the spiritual aspects, which will become eventually the first atom. Within this space, I guess, emerges a second demiurge, which we've been mentioning, which generates the final structures of the Pleroma along with the initial population of the Pleroma, various gates, helpers, powers, the atom of light, and his 365 eons, which are probably somehow tied to time. From here, we shift over to a series of deeps, along with their various powers, aspects, and fatherhoods, as the text has it, including their generated inhabitants, which also include Christ. So Christ has showed up as the fruit of the 12 spaces. We also learn of the deep of Sethius, from which it seems the divine spark emerges, which will eventually become human souls, which are referred to as the kinsmen to the mysteries. Referring to people as kinsmen to the mysteries is just great. I feel like that should be like the name of fans of Esoterica, kinsmen to the mysteries. Well, this realm seems to produce the Mother City, which parallels the realm of the Primal Father City of the first few chapters of the Displaced Leaves. Sethius will dispatch the light spark first up into the Pleroma, which will then fall down into the cosmic realms along with a helpful group of watchers. Yes, a helpful group of watchers. So there's that. Attention now shifts to the 12-pronged ionic crown, which generates a vast array of entities, including the cosmic mist, a feature of the cosmology of the Pistis Sophia and the Books of You, and it may have been the Milky Way, we're not really sure, along with generating a second divine mother, or the All-Mother. During this period, the Christhood is merged with the only begotten one. They were originally distinct for whatever reason. We have the first of several prayers from the All-Mother. These hymns, by the way, are absolutely beautiful, well worth reading, and just getting to them is like an oasis in this cosmology. Before there is some kind of convulsion in the Pleroma before peace is restored by the Primal Overseer. The Sethian triple-powered one now appears. In fact, the recently unbegotten Christ is now made the creative word, or logos, while he was hidden during the disturbance in the Pleroma. The nature of this convulsion or disturbance within the Pleroma is, of course, never discussed or described. We have no idea what it was, so it's not explained, because that would make sense, and we're not doing that today, apparently. At any rate, the convulsion in the Pleroma also draws back the veils between the Pleroma and the not Pleroma, it seems, wherein the cosmos will appear after the existence is divided between the non-existent with matter of Hule appearing as the latter. The All-Mother, who is now seemingly functioning as a kind of third Demiurge, seems to form the cosmos of the Earth, Moon, Sun, and all of the planets, with again further hauntingly beautiful prayers to the thrice begotten one, who is apparently called Hermes, so randomly it seems like Hermetic stuff is appearing in the text. Human beings seem to be created at this point provided with a garment of the bodies and provided knowledge of the mysteries which will ultimately prove salvific. Further prayers of the demiurgic All-Mother, hoping that the condition of her creation, us, won't be condemned to the body garment forever, now appear, and again, these are extremely beautiful. The light spark now descends from the Pleroma to become the souls of human beings. The veil between the Pleroma and the realm of the cosmos seems now to be closed, and the land down below is divided into the left and the right. Maybe Kemet and Deshret, sort of Egyptian vibes. There's a revelation of cosmic law and the mystery given over to human beings, seemingly only to the ones in the land of the right, that they are in fact gods via the divine spark hidden within them. This is all followed by numerous prayers for redemption, the invitation of various angel-like spirits to aid human beings in their ultimate quest for salvation, the power of baptism, and the apparently Sethian angel deities to aid in this process. And then the text just breaks off. That's the end. We don't have any more of it. We have a few more pages of hymns to the Primal Father and his city, which, as I mentioned earlier, probably go at the beginning of the text rather than at the end, although when you read it, you could kind of go either way with it. Now, I want to be very, very clear with you. I would be lying to you if I said this was an accurate summary. I'm not even sure I agree with it myself. You want to see what this text does to your mind? You're not even sure whether or not you agree with yourself anymore when you talk about it. And maybe that's the point. Maybe it's kind of a long-form Gnostic koan or something. Does the Untitled treatise in the Bruce Codex make any sense? Moo. And honestly, that's perfectly fine. We aren't entitled to understand everything from history, especially esoteric history. This text and others were probably meant for audiences initiated into mysteries that we will never have access to. And these texts will likely remain mysterious. We aren't entitled to understand them, and being bewildered by these texts is a blessing, because at least that means they survive. But also, and simply put, you have to go read it for yourself. Break out a spreadsheet, map it all out, see if it makes any analytic heads or tails to you, see if it just makes vibes sense to you. I don't know, you need to read it. But my summary of the text is basically a long-form attempt to make this text make any linear sense, and you should not trust me. You simply have to go read it for yourself and see what you think this text means. If for nothing else, then some of the beautiful, beautiful poetry actually still in it. Some of the most lovely Gnostic poetry I've ever read is in the Untitled treatise. That and the free weapons-grade bewilderment. There is an unreliable older translation from 1918 that I don't really recommend, but you can read the McDermott translation online for free, so check that out in the link below. Of course, it's also published by Brill, so the Demiurge. And also, but they do give you the Coptic text of the original and that hard-to-read, churchy, Bohairic style font, which is fun all itself. But in all seriousness, this is the kind of stuff that I just love doing on this channel. Taking on a text universally regarded by experts as utterly inaccessible, and just having an honest exploration of it. This is the Esoterica equivalent of Hold My Beer. before, punting it to y'all and making it y'all's problem. So, with the exception of the Zostrianos, which I'll come back to, we've covered here on the channel some of the most difficult text in Gnosticism. The Pistis Sophia, the Books of You, and finally I got up the nerve to do the Untitled Text. Well, until new scholarship appears and I have to go do this again. Of course, lots more Gnosticism to come, so stick around for that. Until then, I'm Dr. Justin Sledge, and thank you for coming along with me on these wild rides through these texts where I just say basically that we don't understand what's happening in a text for half an hour. But I appreciate it. Thank you for watching. This is Esoterica, where we explore the arcane in history, philosophy, and religion.